It was multiple lines squashed together, three long floaters spread out and covered into a single one that tailed it off. It was always just there. I could swear that I saw it move when I had my focus off on it. The entire shape didn't move. No, but a slight twist of a tendril, maybe. I somehow finished my shift. Needless to say, it was extremely hard to get work done. But I somehow did it. Driving home was even worse. I had to use my full attention on the road. Had to ignore the microscopic movements that the thing in the corner of my vision was performing. I knew it was moving when I wasn't focusing on it. I skipped dinner when I got home. I had lost my appetite anyway. I figured the darkness of my bedroom would help my eyes. Yes, they must just be overworked. Rest would do them good. I laid in bed and listened to some audio dramas on my phone until I felt tired enough to sleep. My sleep was restless. I stood in a wasteland, orange sand at my feet. A temple of unknownable design lay half sunken in the sand. A storm was brewing. Even in my dream state I could feel the cold sand whipped up by the wind cut into my skin. First on an eroded, sand-shirted mesa was what seemed to be a bird. It faced me and took to the air. But it wasn't a bird. It was like a bird, I'm sure. But as it got closer, my mind started to scream. My dream self was paralyzed. Something about it was wrong. The beak too long, the face with only skin and feathers where eyes should have been. The talons that stretched and flexed in unnatural ways as it flew. It looked at me with its eyeless face as it flew towards me. It was still looking at me as it lifted its body up and aimed its talons at me, swooping in for the kill. I shot awake, drenched in sweat. My heart stopped. It was next to me. Working on pure adrenaline, I swung my arm and smashed it into the empty space on the bed next to me. I blinked in confusion. No, it wasn't next to me. It was that eye floater. The shape of it looked a lot like that bird's claw. I frowned. The floater was still there. Sleep didn't help. I called out of work that day and made a rush appointment with an eye doctor. I could see that floater change as the day went on. I would catch it twisting while I was making breakfast, growing while I drove to my appointment. It was when I was sitting in the eye doctor's waiting room that I realized it was getting clearer. I could make out detail in the transparent shape now. Little horizontal lines going up and down the tendrils. It gained a color at the ends, yellow like a bird's talon. But it couldn't be. That was a dream. The thing couldn't come out of my dream. That didn't make any sense. And yet, the sinking feeling in my gut began to grow. The doctor found nothing physically wrong with my eyes. She strongly suggested that I go to a hospital, that this could indicate a problem with my brain. I thanked her. It was a good idea. I drove to the emergency room and explained my issues. The weeks of bills would be a pain to deal with, but it would be worth it to get this thing out of my vision. It was about an hour till they were ready for me. They wheeled me down to the imaging lab, to a room with a big machine. They had me close my eyes as I went in. I was back in the wasteland. Same location. Same mesa ahead of me. Same bird. The scene repeated. It was just like a déjà vu to me. It looked at me without eyes and took flight. There was a horrible screeching as it flew, a tearing in the air, like nails on the chalkboard. It got into its hunting position as it swooped down. The vision didn't end. The horrible talon pierced me. It went straight through my eye. I could feel it working its way deeper, grabbing onto my brain, squeezing. I woke. I was back, not in the imaging room, but in a hospital room. A nurse came in. She said I must have been exhausted, that I fell asleep during the scan. I would get the results soon, but the doctors were already recommending I stay overnight. You could never be too careful with the brain, after all. But I was terrified, and I could still feel that thing's talons grasped around my brain. With each stab of my pain in my head, and the vision would explode. Large masses would appear and fade within seconds. Undulating while light would blind me, but the worst was that eye floater. It was still there, in the same position as always. It was more clear now. It was that thing still on, exactly like the dream, but now there was a blurry mass behind it. But I'm still terrified. That things get closer, clearer as I sleep. There is no way I would be able to avoid sleep here. The hospital would make sure that I got my rest. I don't know why this is happening to me. The worst part is I don't know how to stop it. But it will catch up to me eventually. And all it needs is time. My stepmother was great at first, but then she started poisoning me. My mom dying was the single most devastating thing I ever experienced. I loved her so much. I think it was down to my dad being so cold and distant, and my mother always being there to give me what I craved from my father. We had only just buried my mom. He didn't even wait a month. My mother's side of the bed wasn't even cold before Susan took her place. She was nice, and for a while she tried her best to fill in the gaps I had missed since my mom died. She would take me on trips and buy me stuff, and it did feel nice to have a mother figure in my life again. We were starting to bond. To be honest, if it wasn't for Susan, I would have been alone with my grief. My dad and I were never that close. He worked long hours, and even if he was at home, he was never interested in me. I always got the feeling he resented me. I loved him because he was my dad, but there was no real love there. It wasn't long after the honeymoon that Susan's behavior started to change. It started with my dog. Max was the cutest Jack Russell on the planet. My mother bought him for me when I was sick in the hospital one Christmas. It was to make up for me having to spend Christmas Day on a drip and being too sick to get out of the hospital bed. My dad never liked the dog, and Susan knew this. They argued about him constantly, and after a very heated argument, I wake up to find my dog gone. When I asked Susan about him, she snapped at me and told me my dad hated the dog, and that was it. That was the first time I would seen a different side to her. I was sick a lot as a kid. The doctors never found a reason for it. So when I started getting sick again, I didn't think much of it. When my dad cooked for us one evening, I was struggling to eat due to the pains in my stomach. So I was just sitting there picking at my dad's lumpy potatoes. This must have annoyed Susan, who was glaring at me from the other side of the table. "If you're not going to eat, you can starve up in your room," she shouted as she picked up my plate and smashed it off the ground. After that night, her behavior completely changed. She became cold and spiteful and became weirdly concerned about me eating. She was at her worst when my dad was in the room. I had to ask her for permission to eat, and depending on her mood, I either starved or she would sit and watch, making sure I ate every morsel of food. It felt like she was unraveling. Her mental stare seemed to get worse as the months progressed. She became paranoid and started asking me strange questions about how I was feeling. She would ask about how I felt towards my dad and how he felt towards me. I was starting to get scared. My dad always hated how close me and my mother were, so it was like she was trying to please my dad by being horrible to me. When Susan went away for a few days, she cooked out a load of dinners for me and my dad and put them in the fridge for when she was gone. When I ate the first meal, I got violently sick. When the same thing happened the second time, I knew she was trying to poison me. I went and told my dad, but he didn't believe me and called me a horrible little liar. He made me sit and watch as he ate some, and when he didn't get sick, he made me eat the rest of the food left in the fridge. The night Susan came home, my father decided to cook dinner to welcome her back. Susan was helping my dad finishing, so I figured this was her chance to put the poison in my food. So I planned to switch the plates when she wasn't looking. As we all sat there eating, I kept looking at Susan, waiting for her to start choking, and I started screaming in agonizing pain. I'll be honest, I was getting a bit of thrill waiting for her to croak it. As we all sat eating our food, my dad turned to me with a sinister grin on his face and asked me how my food tasted. I told him it was the best thing I ever ate while staring at Susan. Then my dad let out a gut-wrenching scream. Holding his throat, he fell to the floor, gasping for breath. I watched in disbelief as my father quickly succumbed to the poison he thought was in my dinner. Susan looked at me and gave me a friendly smile, but I couldn't know for sure if he was trying to poison you. So when I went away, I had the food tested. How did he know he was poisoning me? I asked with the curiosity. When I fed Max some of the food you left on your plate, he got sick. When I brought him to the vet, they told me he was poisoned. He should be okay in a couple more days. Now eat up and we can have ice cream later. Isn't family wonderful? Let me start by putting heavy emphasis on the fact that my mother is an eccentric person. At least, that's probably the nicest way to put it. Even from a young age, I could tell my mom was a little off compared to others. But it never amounted to anything overly serious or dangerous. Just weird stuff. For an example, occasionally I would catch her staring blankly into the television screen without blinking for minutes at a time. Another time I witnessed her pull my discarded dinner from the trash and reheat it. That one really bothers me thinking back on it as an adult. After my grandpa passed away, my mom and I reconnected more than we had in previous years. I'm 30 now, so when my mom asked me to move back in with her, I was completely opposed for obvious reasons. She's a convincing person and brilliant when it comes to getting what she wants. She used undeniable logic against me, and before I knew it, I was living with her again. Within a couple weeks of living with her again, the eyebrow-raising antics started. It began with just barely questionable stuff. Sometimes she would get up in the middle of the night and use my bathroom instead of hers. Some nights I would find her staring off into the TV like she did when I was little. Weird stuff, but nothing unheard of. The questionable stuff quickly escalated into completely abnormal stuff. One night, I stayed up until about 4 a.m., binging one of my shows. Before going to sleep, I went to the back porch to smoke a cigarette. I watched my mom walk out of the woods and back into the house without even acknowledging I was there. When I asked her about it in the morning, and she had somehow convinced me that I was the crazy one, that she slept soundly all night. I have known people who sleepwalk, and that wasn't sleepwalking. Our eyes were open. People don't walk around in the woods sleepwalking with their eyes fully open. Going to the kitchen to make a cup of coffee one morning, I caught her digging around in the litter box with her bare hands. When I asked her what she was doing, she replied with a simple, "Gotta clean the box," completely avoiding anything regarding how she was doing it. Well, fully convinced she had lost her mind, I started calling around to other family members asking for help. To no surprise, not a single one picked up. I left voicemails and texts with each one, hoping at least one would have the decency to answer. After waiting about 3 weeks with no response, it was obvious that I was on my own. I did some research on sleepwalkers. I learned that it's normal for them to not react to things or people. They're also known for saying things and doing things that just don't make sense. Everything is coming together now, and I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Talking to my mom about sleepwalking didn't go as I thought it would. I asked her if she had any memories of waking up in weird places, doing strange stuff, etc. as a kid, and she swore off and down that she would never done anything of the sort. I have a plan for the next few weeks. So I will stay up late and put together as much evidence as possible and show her. I don't know if she truly doesn't know or if she's just too embarrassed to admit any of it, but I'm determined at this point. Got the evidence? Well, sort of. I haven't slept yet, so apologize if I ramble. I heard her slam the back door, and of course, I went after her and immediately began recording with my phone. I ended up following her a good distance into the woods until she decided to take off at full speed into the dark, and I had to chase after her. I wasn't really focused on recording anymore and was much more concerned about her getting hurt running around in the dark. I looked for her for hours in the woods, and when I did find her, I wish that I hadn't, as awful as that may sound. She was in a full gallop back and forth on all fours like it was totally natural. I would be lying to you if I said that I didn't take off running back to the house the moment I saw her like that. Not even a few seconds after I made it back inside, something crashed against the outside of the door. I turned on the back porch light just fast enough to see her gallop off back into the woods. The evidence I got was no more than her simply walking into the woods. You can be mad at me all you want. You are not the one who had to watch their own mother skitter off into the woods like a wild animal. Truth to be told, I'm scared to death to approach her at all now. I showed my mom the video of her walking into the woods. She didn't really react at all. In fact, she basically ignored me and the video altogether. I feel like I'm at a total loss. It's been a few days. The weirdest thing I have seen her do is a TV stare, which by now was absolutely normal under the circumstances. Today, my mom brought home my grandpa's ashes, talking about how she wanted to scatter him in one of his favorite places. Not too weird and kind of wholesome, right? The thing is, my grandpa was a total recluse, and he didn't have a favorite anything. On another note, as soon as she brought him home, she stuck the jar of ashes into the attic immediately. I put that off for a while, thinking she probably just didn't want the ashes of her father sitting out in the house like an ornament. The thought seemed plausible enough to at least. I was talking to my mom about something regarding Grandpa. I don't recall what exactly, and she responded by laughing and saying word for word, "He's fine. He's in the attic with the rest of the family." Too much happened after that to explain all of it. In short, I left and contacted with the authorities. I don't know exactly what they found in the attic, but they won't disclose information. My imagination wanders endlessly after the detective told me during questioning. You don't want to know what they found? Yes, I do, but I don't. My mom's missing. It's already been months since. If I had to be brutally honest, I just don't know how to feel about any of it. This all kind of broke me so hard, and I have done my best to move on with my life since. I got a migraine at work. Nothing has been the same since. You all right, May? Yeah, I think so. Just pain stabbed me like a knife was sunk deep into my brain. Oh, that was disappointing. I told you you'd get a chance, and you'll get a headache, Mary said, walking over to my desk. Go sit in the conference room. The dark will help. I'll get you some Advil. Thanks, I replied, removing my gloves and lab coat and heading over to the conference room. I felt dizzy. I held my right eye closed as I walked. Having it open wasn't helping. There was an undulating shape in the corner of my vision, making it hard to see and causing that sharp pain in my head. I got to the conference room and sat down in one of the leather chairs. What the hell was it called again? We were just talking about it during the break. Mary walked in, a cup of water in one hand and pills in the other. I get them from time to time. Must be from looking at that computer screen for so long. I took the pills and chased them down with the water. Yeah, I replied. I have only had this happen once and twice to me before. I never got to the headache part though. I would usually just lay down for 20 minutes and absolutely fine. You were just getting older, Mary chuckled. Things like this happen more as you age. You know how bad my knees are. She smiled at me. Take as long as you need, kid. I can send someone to cover you. I nodded and mumbled a thank you as I held my eyes shut down. Having them closed helped a lot. She was right about getting older. I had started to find white hairs in the morning. Not even gray, just full of white. Hell, I was only 25. I thought I would have to wait longer for that. I opened my eyes. The ocular migraine was fading fast, at least. The large, pulsating shape that had taken over the right side of my vision was now nothing more than a small dot that faded more with each passing second. I got up and stretched before heading back into the lab. The bright fluorescent lights probably weren't helping. I made a mental note to look into blue light glasses, anything to prevent those migraines. I sat down at my desk and was getting ready to work again when I coughed. An explosion of eye floaters engulfed my vision. Squiggly little lines danced around for a moment, floating all around until they began to dissipate a new moment later. It was great. I remembered hearing somewhere that those get worse with age too. I began to get back to the work. It was something I could get stuck into if I wasn't careful. Something I may have already gotten trapped in. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do with my life. It wasn't what I went to school for. There was still time. I thought I could still do other stuff. How long had I been here? 2 years? I would get out soon. I would do something I really wanted to do. And that's when I noticed it. Right in the middle of my train of thought. One of those ice floaters I had was still there in the corner of my vision. Perfectly still. I found that very strange. I would usually only catch them for a second, overlaid on my vision, fading as fast as they appeared and moving. I had never seen one stay in the same place for this long, or even stay around this long at all. How long had it been exactly? Was it there since I sat down and coughed? Even longer? Or had it just shown up now? I couldn't tell. I tried to focus on my work. I would just get through the shift and sleep it off. Sleep would work, right? It would reset my eyes or something. I didn't know, I just hoped. I tried to ignore it. I was able to, mostly. And it was always there, sitting in the corner of my vision. There is an ancient tribe residing in our local woods. When my dog ran off into the woods during one of our walks, I knew I couldn't chase after her right away. Everyone in our town knew that the woods weren't empty. There was something in there, and especially the older residents insisted that it was people, or at least something akin to people. They called them the tribe. I never fully embraced these beliefs, but still acted according to them. There were just too many things off about the woods for the tribe to be noticing but an old legend. The fact that everyone was utterly convinced that the tribe was real in itself was cause for concern. I'd never heard of anybody venturing into the forest, not even to prove the saying wrong. There was nobody working there either, despite the area being so huge. If the woods were normal, chances are there would be foresters and woodcutters, or maybe even hunters in there. And that's what I figured. All pets usually stayed far away from the tree line as well. At that point, I had no idea why Chips, my dog, had gone off there in the first place. She had never shown any interest in the woods and had even seemed apprehensive about getting too close to them. That's why I always thought it safe to walk alongside the tree line. I was sure she would never leave my side. Her tearing the leash from my hands and dashing off into the thickest that day, that happened completely unexpectedly. At least I knew who to go to for advice. There's this guy named Duncan. He's very old, maybe even the oldest man in the entire town, and definitely the most knowledgeable. He hangs out at a small pub most of the time, so I was sure I would find him there. I got on my way as fast as I could. When I arrived at the bar, I needed to stop for a moment to catch my breath before looking around inside. The interior was dark in its colors, the wood of the floor and the counter as well as the tables being a warm, deep brown. The lights were just bright enough for me to easily spot the man, and I had been looking for over in one of the corner tables. There weren't a lot of other people inside the pub at that time. Duncan lifted his head in mild surprise when he noticed me approaching. We weren't total strangers. In a town as small as ours, basically everyone knew each other. "Hello," I gasped. He lifted his glass to me with a lazy smile of greeting that didn't say anything. "I need to go into the woods. My dog ran off." He gave me a nod as if to tell me to say no more. He went straight to business. "First off, go in there by yourself. They don't take kindly to groups and noise, and be respectful to those you meet inside." He lowered his head slightly. "You know, they don't refrain from leaving those woods because they don't want to make it. Does that mean they're trapped there or something?" "Well, they're not trapped. The woods are their home and this is ours, and we have forbidden them from entering ours. That's why they don't come out." Duncan looked me over, his brows creased almost like he was trying to figure out if I would understood the gravity of the situation. Seemingly satisfied, he noted and went on. "The woods are big, easy to get lost in. There's a single path through. It leads into the woods and it will lead you back out. You are safe there. Follow it and you won't get lost." Duncan gave me a few seconds to let everything sink in before continuing once more. "You don't want to give anyone in there your real name. Names are taboo. Knowing your name will give them power over you to be used in our world." His wording was ominously cryptic. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "It means you won't be able to get rid of them," he sighed. "Never mind, just don't let it come to that. Make up a nickname or something and expect them to do the same. They're very careful with that kind of thing." "That's easy enough to remember," I would say. "You will eventually come across the people in there and you are gonna have to talk to them. There is no way around it. I don't want to scare you, but the further you proceed into those woods, the crazier the ones you are gonna meet will be." Noticing my unease, Duncan gave me a quick smile. "It will be okay. Just hurry, get in and out quickly and avoid the deeper parts if you can. If you stay for too long, the people there and the woods themselves are gonna start messing with your head. It's tricky. Everything's different in there, with space, time, even just keep that in mind. The whole place is gonna want to screw you over." He let out a husky laugh, though I wasn't sure what he thought was funny. I stood up, thanking him profusely. Gone deeper into the woods in the meantime. I was prepared well enough as I was. I still had all of my dog walking supplies in my pockets, treats for Chips, pepper spray, but that was all right. I headed straight for the woods. I knew where to find the path. I'd walked by it before, actually, stepping onto it, however, felt quite different. There was a strong sense of unease within me all of a sudden. I was barely 2 steps past the tree line, and already I felt like I was in a whole other world. Maybe it was all the expectation, the anxiety built by Duncan's instructions, that when I turned to glance behind me, back outside, it looked so far away. The trail was just wide enough for me to stand on. The feeling of dread grew stronger the further I went. The trees around me stood tall and imposing, and in some places their leaves were so lush I couldn't see the sky above. I tried to calm my mind by listening to my surroundings. They say the sounds of nature are the most soothing. Dearer, but somehow the singing of the birds and the quiet chirping of insects around me only added to my discomfort. Suddenly, there was something else, the sound of water trickling down and hitting the soft forest floor. I glanced around frenetically only to find the source just a few meters ahead of me. It was a man. His back was turned to me and he was facing the tree in front of me. He probably hadn't noticed me yet, so I turned to look away and nervously cleared my throat. "Yeah, I know you are there. Give me a second, will you? Kinda busy here." "Oh, I'm sorry," I stammered, feeling my cheeks heat up. "It's fine." The sound of the liquid running ceased, and after 2 more seconds I dared to turn around to him. I don't know what I would been expecting, but he wasn't it. I looked him over as discreetly as I could. He was short, about my height, and of about the same age as me too. His clothes were fairly normal as well. Jeans, boots, and a white flannel shirt, the latter of which just a bit too baggy to flatter his slight frame. His dark, overgrown hair and the stubble on his face made him look a bit unkempt. "Nice to meet you, sir," I said slowly. "If you don't mind, I would like to ask you something. I hope it's not." "Don't talk fancy with me. It makes me want to puke." "Get it," I muttered, a bit embarrassed. That had been clear enough, though. "Do you live here? Do you like this place?" "I do, though." "I'm looking for my dog. She's white with black speckles, pretty big." I held my hand up to my hip to indicate her height. "I haven't seen her," he replied, "and pets don't run in here for no reason." "What do you mean?" "Maybe someone lured it away without your noticing. We can do stuff like that, you know. I would watch my back if I were you." I swallowed, holding his gaze. "I appreciate the advice," I finally said. "I'll be on my way." The man in the white shirt gave me an indifferent shrug. "Take care." I turned to leave with a queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. Glancing back over my shoulder, I found that the man was gone. Unnerved, I stuck to the path, focusing on looking around without leaving it. I called out for chips every other minute, hesitant to alert anyone, yet hopeful to spot my dog come running towards me from somewhere in the underbrush. No such luck. It had gained someone else's attentions, though. She appeared right ahead of me, just a few feet off to the side from the path, an elderly woman with long gray hair and wrinkled face. She was wearing a long, dirty dress that had probably been white at one point. She stood unmoving even as I kept approaching. I cleared my throat. "Hello," I called out, stopping in my tracks. I didn't want to get too close to her, but she didn't answer. "Excuse me, have you seen a dog come through?" I shouted. The woman slowly started walking towards me. Her steps were lumbering and heavy. Her hair fell down to cover her face like a stringy, torn-up veil. Despite her sluggish movements, I was beginning to grow nervous. Something about the way she was stalking towards me made me feel like I was prey about to be lunged at. Not wanting to show my fear, I cautiously backed away. "Don't come any closer," I told her in the most commanding voice I could muster. I reached into my pocket, fumbling for the small can of pepper spray. I had no idea if I would be able to defend myself with it at all. but I figured out that it would be better than nothing. Please, I said, I'm not here to hurt you. The old woman extended her hand to touch my face. Her nails were long, sharp, and cracked. I didn't dare to move when she ran them through my hair, her dull eyes staring into mine. I held my breath. What was I supposed to do? Shove her away? I didn't want to risk provoking her. But suddenly, she grasped for my throat. I was just fast enough to duck and avoid her twisted, bony fingers. I dashed forward and took off running, my feet drumming on the soft dirt ground. I blindly raced ahead. I felt the can of pepper spray fall out of my open pocket, but I didn't stop to pick it up. Risking a glance over my shoulder, I saw her lumbering after me. She was not very fast, though, and I noticed she never once set foot on the path. It was like she needed to stay off it for some reason. Still, that didn't mean she couldn't hurt me. There was a low thud behind me. I staggered to a halt and turned to find that the old woman was lying on the ground next to her small rock. It must have hit her on the head. It had obviously caused her to tumble. Despite that, she was already pulling herself back up, and I took off down that trail again. At least this would help me lose her. I kept running until my sides were burning with pain and the sweat from my forehead was dripping down my neck. It was only when I was absolutely sure she wasn't behind me anymore that I finally slowed down. I dropped to my knees. My throat was sore and dry. Taking deep breaths, I sucked in the cool, fresh air. I was quietly muttering phrases of reassurance to myself, mixed with the occasional swear word. Suddenly, I heard someone clear their throat. I spun around only to find the man in the white shirt from before standing behind me. He looked rather pleased with himself. "Did you throw that rock?" "Yes, I did." "Thank you so much." He silenced me with a dismissive wave of his hand, but he was smiling still. "I bet she's more like what you were expecting to see here." He laughed and shook his head. "Look, I don't really get why you were chasing after that mud, but for what it's worth, I'm sure it's gonna be interesting to watch. If you will allow it, I would like to come along, and that'll be mutually beneficial. Right? I'm not saying I will carry you around or anything, but I would make myself useful, help you out a bit." He drew out of his words, leaving them to linger in the air. I didn't need to think about the offer very long, and said, "Yes, please." He allowed his smile to widen, looking excited as he wiped his hands on his pants. "This should be fun." "Plenty," I muttered. "Hey, I know real names are taboo, but—" About that, I overheard two kids walk along the tree line talking a while ago. One was telling this story about someone named Tamlin. It's too long to tell you all about it. He almost sounded embarrassed. But I liked the story so, and that's what I would like for you to call me, Tamlin. Tamlin saved me the effort of making up a name of my own saying, as he simply began calling me Janet. I had little say in it, but I figured complaining wouldn't help. Who was that woman? What did she want? I eventually asked him. We had been walking for a while, me on the path and him beside it. "Who can say? I don't know her personally. We're not like one big family here," he began. "Maybe she wanted to eat you, or maybe she was lonely and wanted company, but didn't know how to go about it. Are there more like her?" "Yes, there's always more. On the plus side, it's rare to come across the aggressive ones. I don't even know what she was doing so close to the path. The likes of her usually stay in hiding." "Right, the path. Why don't you walk on it?" "Because your people put it there," he replied, seemingly thinking this is a valid explanation. "It's not our ground to trade you." He asked me a lot of things about myself, my everyday life, and even my dog. I tried to tell him as much as I could, without giving anything away that I shouldn't. He didn't like talking about the woods though, and I suspected he was tired. He was tired of the topic. It turned out he was quite the skilled guide. Sometimes we would hear odd noises ahead, like shouting or chanting, and he would make us stay in place until they would fade into the distance. He could sense when there was somebody ahead we needed to be wary, and told me when it was safe to call for chips and when to stay silent. Tam himself would occasionally stray from my side and go deeper into the woods in search of the dog, so I wouldn't have to leave the path. I watched the sunset through the canopy of leaves above. We hadn't come across anyone else, and there was no trace of chips. I was tired, and my feet were starting to hurt. I couldn't believe that the woods were too big to comb through in an entire day. I had never imagined them to be this huge. I thought about calling my parents, but not wanting to worry them, I decided against it. I lived next door to them in a much tinier house that also belonged to us. They wouldn't notice my absence for the time being. The forest floor was soft. It is still quite unpleasant to sleep on. Tam was obviously completely unfazed by the prospect of resting on the bare ground, but he didn't give me grief for being squeamish. The uncomfort was one thing, but what was worse was that I felt utterly exposed. I spent the night wide awake, restless and afraid. Nothing happened though. When Tam woke up, it was still dark. There was no reason to keep lying around, so we moved on. I saw the sun rise overhead. We kept calling out for chips, but it still came out nothing. Remembering what Duncan had said about the more dangerous inhabitants of the woods living further in the back, I asked Tam if it was true. I guess he replied curtly. It made me think I wasn't feeling well, and there was no trace of chips. The further we could go in, the more threats there would be on the way. Was my dog even alive anymore? Maybe, but I'm not sure. I thought just maybe it would be better for me to simply go back. I'm pretty sure Tam knew what I was thinking. He did his best to encourage me, probably afraid to lose his temporary source of entertainment this early on. Hey, can you do this? I'll keep you safe, okay? Do you need anything? I know where to get you food and water if that's what you want. Water? I had all but forgotten about how thirsty I was. Duncan had told me not to eat or drink here, but he would also say that if I had to, then I could. What other solutions was there anyways? Tam assured me that the water was clean and safe to consume. He said he would fetch it from a nearby creek. He offered to take me with him, but I told him I would rather stay on the path, otherwise would end up lost. A lump in my throat, I watched him walk off. I wasn't thrilled about being on my own, but I knew I was safe on the path. I tried to curl up in the middle of it, hoping to hide myself or at least keep my head low. I felt like an idiot, and it wasn't too effective either. My stomach dropped when I suddenly heard multiple sets of footsteps up ahead. The unmistakable crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs came closer and closer, and I nervously stared off into the direction they were coming from. Soon enough, I spotted 4 figures appearing from behind a bunch of hedges. Noticing they were drawing closer, I staggered to my feet. It looked to be 3 women and a man, all of them dressed in raids rather than actual clothing. Carefully staying beside the trail, they slowly walked up to me. The one that came close at first was one of the women. She was tall, almost unnaturally so. Her hair was tousled and reached all the way down to her hip. Her face was covered in a mix of scars and slowly healing open wounds, as though something or someone had scratched and cut it up. The skin around the cuts was frayed and dirty. Her tone was almost cordial, but there was something about her voice that threw me off. It didn't sound as though speech came natural to her, more like she was mimicking a noise she would heard before without understanding the meaning of the word. It was simply off. I returned her greeting, eyes downcast as the other 3 stepped up to me as well. Are you here on your own? The women asked. No, I have someone with me. He will be back soon. Oh, where did he go? She didn't sound like she believed me. To get water, I muttered. So he's from the woods. Yes, I finally dared to meet her gaze. Her eyes were too wide to look normal. I toyed with the idea of asking her about chips and eventually pressed out the question, shifting my weight from one foot to another uncomfortably. The dog is yours? Oh, I have seen it. Quiet chuckles rippled through the small group as they exchanged knowing glances. I can show you where, but you would have to come with us, obviously. She regarded me with a half a smile. I doubted that she actually expected me to agree. I would have had to be pretty stupid to do so. Get back, I told her firmly as she leaned in to snip my shoulder. She straightened up again. Then one of her companions reached out, and before I knew it, she had pushed me and I staggered, landing on my behind on the ground beside the path. Before I could get up again, the tall woman grabbed me by the back of my neck and lifted me to my feet. See, now we are on the same page. Not that bad, isn't it? She hissed softly, that alligator-like trim still on her chest, the thin lips. Let go of me, I growled, suppressing the fear in my voice as I struggled and eventually managed to tear out of her grasp, her nails leaving painful marks on my skin. I couldn't get back on the path in time, though, as the man from the group had moved in front of me, blocking it off. I stumbled away from him and the tall lady while the other two quickly stepped over the trail to join us on our side. It's been a while since I last talked to one of your people, the giant woman said, slowly proceeding towards me. You see my face? She went on, tagging her head. That was one of your guys. Now I doubt there is any relation between you and him, but I'm sure you understand my wish. And that was compassionate. I didn't care to find out how exactly she wanted to do that. I hastily took off in the opposite direction, praying the head star would allow me to shake them off. I could already hear them starting to run after me. In between gasps for air, I screamed for Tam Lin in the vain hope that he was somewhere nearby. I tried to keep my pace, chasing off birds and critters alike as my lips slowly turned into limbering, faltering hopes. Like a pack of wolves, the group was still on my heels, and they were catching up, tiring me out. Looking over my shoulder, I saw the tall woman leading her hunting party, a triumphant leer already on her face, when all of a sudden a figure burst out from the underbrush and launched at her from the side. The lady was too surprised to react, and before I could blink, the other person had thrown her to the ground. I could see them clearly now, and my chest grew light with relief when I recognized Tam Lin. Crouching on the larger woman's chest, he dug his fingers into her face, grabbing onto the flayed edges on her wounded skin and starting to pull. Her scream was blood-curdling, an ear-piercing wail of agony. Her three companions had stopped in their tracks, staring at the scenes in shock but not doing anything to stop it. After just a few seconds, Tam got up, his hand a small red patch of torn skin which he dropped to the ground as he backed off. What followed was an awkward display. The woman staggered to her feet as we stood and stared. The pack looked back at us in stunned silence. They were forced to turn and leave though, and it was only when we couldn't see them anymore that I dared to turn and face Tam Lin. You left the path, he said, sounding sorely astounded rather than angry. But I couldn't speak, my throat sore from all the screaming. Still close to tears, I nodded quietly. Tam swallowed. He looked uneasy but managed to give me a smile. It's okay, we'll find it again. We need to get you water first anyways. I found the creek. It's just a little bit ahead. Let's go there first and then we will look for the trail. I nodded again, following him once more as he led me to the trampled down bushes he would emerge from. The creek was nice and clear, completely undisturbed in its route through the forest. I didn't bother looking for any sort of cup. I simply dropped to my knees, and began to shovel the water into my mouth with both hands. Before long I dipped my head into it, greedily sucking it up as Tam stood and watched. Once I was full, I let out a deep, content sigh and plunged down in the tall grass. I had forgotten how thirsty I had been this whole time. We stayed for only a few minutes before making our way back to the path, and that's when disaster struck. There is no way to talk around it. We couldn't find it anymore. We searched all of the surrounding terrain, trying to spot it in the thicket, but to no avail. By the time the sun set, I was starting to panic, hoping to find a map on this place and perhaps call my parents, only to find that the battery had died. It was completely useless. Night fell and we had to stop and get some rest. Then sunrise came again and we moved in. The cycle would repeat itself 4 times before I lost hope. I still remember that exact moment I realized it was futile. There was no way out anymore. The woods had swallowed it. I was trapped. It took me a long time to accept my fate. I cried for 2 entire days. Tamlin tried to console me, but despite his good intentions, he failed. I would never see my parents again. I would never find myself in the comforts of my home. After these 2 days, however, all the things changed. I grew melancholy, then oddly content. The woods have an eerily soothing effect on those that it captured. That's the only way I can explain it. I kept looking for Chips, hoping to at least reunite with her one day. We asked everyone we met on our journey through these endless woods. That's another weird thing. It didn't feel like I was an outsider anymore. The tribe's people, however bizarre and intimidating they would seem, would treat me as one of their own. I wasn't being haunted anymore. I got used to sleeping on the cold ground. I even began to appreciate it. Whenever I would rest my head on it, I felt as though I was listening to the earth's heartbeat. Tamlin and I would sleep side by side like we had during my first night here. Then we moved closer to one another. Then even closer still. I became accustomed with the warmth of his breath off my neck. It was a soft, comforting feeling. He holding my hand and pressing his cheek to mine. One day, he uttered his true name to me, and I told him my own. I'd rarely feel hunger or thirst anymore, and on the few occasions that I did, the woods would feed me. I think I must have forgotten why I had gone down that path in the first place. I forgot who I was and what life outside had been like. I even forgot about Chips. I kept on counting the days though, even though I had forgotten why. 988. That's how many sunrises passed until the day I woke up to barking. I hadn't heard any sounds like it is in so long I couldn't even place it at first. My eyes adjusting to the bright sunlight, I could make out something large and dark right above me. When it came down to touch my face, I found it to be wet and warm. A snort. By the time a large, pink tongue came out of it and started to lick the length of my cheek, and I was certain. And then it all came back to me. It was my sweet, giant puppy. Her collar was still around her neck, the leash attached to it dirty and caked with mud as it had been dragging behind her all this time. I stared at her for a minute straight before I dared to reach out and touch her. I was afraid I would find her to be an illusion or some sort of fever dream. My hands met with matted fur and warm skin underneath. I grabbed her, pulled her onto my lap and hugged her tightly, but I couldn't believe it yet. All memory of her had been erased from my mind. For all I knew, she could have died in those woods months ago. But there she was. Tam looked on in disbelief. Chips began to hover around, looking excited. She ran ahead for a bit and then returned, almost like she wanted to show me something. I rushed over after her and Tam just followed me. Chips led us through the tall grass and hedges in a weird, bendy route that made me wonder where we were going to end up. We wandered around for almost an entire day before finding ourselves in a spot that looked faintly familiar to me. It's hard to remember details of a place where there is nothing but greenery. But I knew I would been there before. And then I saw it. The narrow little dirt path. I was going to get home. After all this time I hadn't even thought of it as possible. My desire to return to my former life was greater than ever, and I was finally hopeful again. I picked up Chip's leash and grabbed Tam by the hand, dragging him along with me as I took up running. I didn't stop, not even when I was starting to get tired. Finally, I saw light up ahead, brighter than the sunlight I would seen filtered through the leaves. It was the end of the path, and the exit. I slowed down, my breathing racked and strained. Chip snatched my arm with her head, and I turned to look back to Tam. "So you are leaving," he said. "Honestly, I didn't think you would. And you'd do it ever." "Me neither," I admitted. I squeezed his hand before letting go of it. He nodded slowly and reached up to scratch the back of his neck. "I won't lie, with you gone, there is no reason for me to stay any longer either," he muttered. "I thought you would stay here with me, huh? I was happy when we were all by ourselves. I could have left already when you told me your name, but I didn't want to do it anything anytime anymore." "Well, it doesn't matter anymore, does it?" I stared at him with wide eyes, unable to comprehend what he was saying. He just smiled, walking ahead of me towards the exit. It was only then that I noticed he was walking on the path, just like me. He would even been right behind me this entire time, and I hadn't even realized it. Now, standing by the edge of the forest, Tam motioned for me to follow. Still utterly confused, I hurried to join him. When we stepped outside the woods, the light was almost blinding. I blinked, but Tam stared up at the bright sky, completely unfazed. "It feels so different here," he breathed, lightly kicking the ground with his boot. "It's not like I imagined, but it was nice." He turned to me with a curious expression. "Is it the way you remembered?" I was too stunned to say a word. Tam tilted his head to me. "You don't have to look so shocked. It was you who told me your name. That meant a lot to me, it still does. Knowing the name of one of your people, it makes us special. It means we can tread on your ground, that we can live. Not my original goal, I just wanted your name and wanted your company. Before all this, I would see you every time you walked by the woods with that dog. I was always watching and I kept wondering what you were like. I made up my little plan and it worked, as you can see." He let out a soft chuckle. "I told you some of us are lonely, so I wasn't completely dishonest with you. I even said that pets don't run off there for no reason." Frowning, he added, "I don't know how Chips found you again." "I thought I would lured her deep enough into the forest for her to never get back. Especially with her little doggy brain. It took me a little while to regain my ability to speak. You can't be serious. I figured out this would come as a surprise. I was never obvious about it, that's why I didn't come along with you right away either." He gave me an almost sad smile. "Honestly, I feel bad about it, I really do. I know how much you wanted to go home. I was never going to use force to keep you in there. I just kept leading you away from the path once I got the chance. I messed with your head a little, but didn't let you see your way home. But it was the woods' influence too." "What are you talking about? You said you could check the date on your phone. We are outside, and it still works now. Just check it out." I reached into my pocket, fumbling for my cell phone only to find that I could actually turn it on. It was extremely low on battery, but it worked. A look at the date told me that exactly 3 days had passed since I last looked at it. "That's impossible," I breathed. "How I counted the days. That's not my doing. That's not my work. It's the woods. They can make you think a few hours are months and that a week in an eternity. Humans come and go. and all experienced that effect. My head swam, and there was an odd ringing in my ears. I felt like I was going to pass out, and you were letting me go. It was difficult finding and forming those words, but I forged them through my trembling lips nonetheless. What else am I supposed to do it? I don't want to hurt you. I'm just gonna see what this side of the world has to offer. It wasn't my initial plan, but I guess it could be worse. At least it's a chance. Do you know how boring it is to stay in the same place for decades and centuries? We have been there for so long. No wonder some of us have gone insane over time. And when you are in there, you keep seeing the ones outside, you people, and well, there was no one. You'll never think you are gonna get out of here. Until you do, I guess. I stared at him with wide, curious eyes and my mouth agape. Tamerlane took my hand again, seemingly trying to look encouraging. I would have pulled away, had it not been for me being frozen in place. I'm going to be good, I promise, he said softly, and almost childlikely in his gaze. I won't hurt anybody here. I'll make myself fit in just fine. Besides, things are worked out for the one you call Duncan as well.